I did everything fast, thought fast, ate fast, talked fast, and walked fast. I even sang my songs fast. I needed to slow my mind down if I was going to be a composer with anything to say.
It's one of the great legends in music history. A young, restless Bob Dylan, not even 21 years old, sits in some Greenwich Village cafe in April of 1962. And in a furious 10-minute burst of inspiration, he scribbles down the lyrics that would become one of the most important songs of the 20th century. Blowin' in the Wind. It's the perfect myth of pure, instantaneous genius, and it's a story Dylan himself has helped fuel for decades.
Afterwards, I got nothing to say about these things I write. I mean, I just write them. I don't have to say anything about them. I don't write them for any reason.
When asked in a 2004 interview if the 10-minute story was true, he just casually replied, "Probably." He's described his early songwriting as an almost supernatural event, saying, "Those early songs were like almost magically written."
I don't know how I got to write those songs. Well, those early songs were like almost magically written.
But what if that isn't the whole story? What if the truth behind this anthem isn't about a lightning-fast moment of creation, but a fascinating journey deep into the heart of American musical tradition? The real story of Blowin' in the Wind is, somehow, even more incredible than the legend. To really get the myth, you have to get the moment. The early 1960s in Greenwich Village wasn't just a place, it was the center of a cultural earthquake. A new wave of artists, poets, and musicians were kicking back against the polished conformity of the 1950s. And into this scene walks a young man from Minnesota named Robert Zimmerman, who now calls himself Bob Dylan. He was a musical sponge. He'd arrived in New York in 1961, mostly to meet his ailing hero, Woody Guthrie. Dylan soaked up Guthrie's persona, his singing style, and his whole philosophy, the idea that a song could be a weapon for social change. He spent all his time in folk clubs like Gerda's Folk City and the Gaslight Cafe, just listening, learning, and performing. He was, as he later put it, completely immersed in the tradition, constantly singing folk standards and learning hundreds of songs from other musicians. It was in this creative pressure cooker that the legend of Blowin' in the Wind was born.
How many roads must a man walk down?
The official story goes that one day in April 1962, the song just arrived, almost fully formed. He reportedly debuted it soon after at Gerda's, and the small crowd was apparently stunned into silence before exploding with applause. The song just felt different. It wasn't a typical finger-pointing protest song. It asked these huge, universal questions, framing the struggle for civil rights and peace in broad, poetic, almost biblical terms. The 10-minute myth was so powerful because it fit the image of Dylan perfectly, a kind of folk prophet, an oracle in a corduroy cap, channeling truths that others couldn't see. It suggested a creative power that was raw and untamed. In his own words, the songs came from a wellspring of creativity. It felt like magic, but that kind of magic always has a source. The story starts to get a lot more interesting the second you listen closely, not just to the words, but to the music itself. Because for all its lyrical originality, the melody of Blowin' in the Wind was not written by Bob Dylan. This is the first major clue that unravels the simple myth. The tune is a direct adaptation of a 19th-century African-American spiritual called No More Auction Block, a song carrying immense historical weight. It's thought to have originated among former slaves who had found freedom in Canada after Britain abolished slavery in 1833. It was a song of liberation and remembrance, a solemn vow from people who had survived the horror of being sold like property. The lyrics are stark and powerful. No more auction block for me, no more, no more, many thousands gone. It's a song that carries the pain of generations in its simple, haunting tune. So how did a young Jewish kid from Minnesota get his hands on this melody? He found it in the one place he was looking for everything, the folk scene. Artists like Odetta, a towering figure in the folk revival, had recorded powerful versions of No More Auction Block.
No more
Dylan, a student of the entire American songbook, would have absolutely heard them. In fact, he later acknowledged the debt, telling an interviewer in 1978, "Blowin' in the Wind has always been a spiritual. I took it off a song called No More Auction Block. That's a spiritual, and Blowin' in the Wind follows the same feeling." This doesn't debunk Dylan's genius. If anything, it deepens the story. He didn't just grab a random tune. He chose a melody that was already soaked in the very themes of freedom and human dignity he wanted to write about. This is the real aha moment, where any thought of plagiarism completely transforms into an appreciation of tradition. Dylan wasn't stealing. He was taking part in one of the oldest and most vital traditions in music, the folk process. This is how folk music has worked for centuries. A community creates a powerful melody. As time goes on, and that community's worries and hopes change, new words are fit to that old familiar tune. It's a way of making the past speak to the present, built on the idea that music belongs to everyone. Dylan's heroes did the exact same thing. Woody Guthrie, the man Dylan practically molded himself after, took the melody from an old Baptist hymn called When the World's on Fire and wrote This Land is Your Land over it. Pete Seeger, another giant of the folk revival, helped popularize We Shall Overcome, a song whose melody is also traced back to an old spiritual. This was the musical language Dylan was fluent in. In his world, borrowing a melody wasn't cheating, it was the whole point. As he said in a 2015 speech, "I learned lyrics and how to write them from listening to folk songs. They gave me the code for everything that's fair game, that everything belongs to everyone." So his choice of No More Auction Block was not a shortcut. It was a profound artistic statement. By taking a melody born from the struggle against slavery and setting it against the backdrop of the civil rights movement, Dylan was drawing an unbroken line through American history. He was connecting the cries of many thousands gone in the 19th century with a new generation's demand for freedom in the 20th. The song's soul was already a century old. Dylan just gave it a new voice for a new fight. So let's go back to that central question. Did Bob Dylan really write Blowin' in the Wind in 10 minutes? The answer is a much more satisfying yes and no. Yes, the lyrics, the poetic soul of the song, very likely did pour out of him in a stunningly short amount of time. People who were there confirm that the song was hot off the pencil when he first played it. But even that came in pieces. Dylan himself mentioned that he wrote the first and third verses initially, and then added the powerful middle verse about seeing the sky and sea a short time later. That 10 minutes of inspiration was real, but it didn't happen in a vacuum. That creative burst was only possible because of the years Dylan had spent getting ready for it. He had dedicated himself to absorbing the folk tradition, to understanding its language and its power. He had internalized hundreds of melodies and stories, creating a rich, fertile ground from which a song like this could spontaneously grow. Think of it this way. The melody was the vessel, already shaped by history. The themes of war and injustice were the water swirling in the air of the 1960s. The 10 minutes was the lightning strike, the moment Dylan's unique genius fused all those elements together. His genius wasn't inventing the ingredients from scratch. It was knowing, almost instinctively, how to combine them into something that felt both ancient and urgently new. The song was already there, he later said. He just took it down with a pencil. In the end, the 10-minute myth about Blowin' in the Wind sticks around because it's a fantastic story. It paints a picture of effortless, divine inspiration, and we love those kinds of stories.